Well, hi folks, and welcome to another episode of Retropower Uncut, episode 222, I'm told, as Jamie has refreshed my memory. I've got my Roundstone coffee ready to go. I'm actually drinking a bit less coffee these days. As I'm getting older, I've decided I need to back off the coffee a bit, but I do have one now, because I need to stay awake. And we're going to start with Aston Martin this week. And the second name of that is appropriate because our handyman's name is Martin, and he is extremely handy. He's actually not here at the moment, in that he's actually gone on a mission to fetch a bit of equipment from near Oxford, which we need for the den. Actually, we need an extractor at the den, and he's gone to fetch that. But he has been very handy in that in between his handy manning, he's been doing some metalwork for us because he's also quite good at that. He has been doing the work on continuing the grafting in of the roof repair on the Aston. He's been fitting that in between all of the other jobs, which is why it's been ticking over in the background. But he's now got that all welded in, and he's just started the process of the metal finishing on that. He got that welded in yesterday afternoon, I think it was. So he used these clamps, which are like the box type clamps, which you will most of our viewers will probably be familiar with. He's used a lot of those to clamp that skin in all the way around. And lots and lots and lots of clamps all the way around here to get that set level, and a bit of messing around, fiddling around, getting everything set up level. And then he's stitched in between the clamps with the TIG welder all the way around. Then he's removed all the clamps, filled in all the rest of the welds all the way around there, fully TIG welded it on top. Then he's taken it, tipped it upside down, melted in all the way around the back, so we've not got a crack. I'm not going to explain all the detail, but if you weld aluminium, what you tend to find is where the weld would drop through on steel and fuse the back as well. On aluminium, it tends to form two unfused ribs on the back that tend to then start a crack between them. So what he's done is then flipped it over, cleaned off the back, and then fuse welded all the way over the back as well, so that you've got no crack starters on the back. And he's then going round and started planishing. So he's tapped up the weld, crushed the weld down to flatten that out and get it all sitting level. Now he's going over and he's sanding off and filing off the top of the weld all the way round, so there's not too much excess material there, because if you planish that while there's excess material there, it'll cause it to stretch too far and put distortion into the roof. So he's taking the bulk of the material away then on the weld, leaving just a smidge of spare material, so that when that's crushed down, that takes any shrinkage out from the weld line. And then it'll be on to the metal finishing, which is basically lots of hammer and dolly work, lots of filing, and just finding out all your highs and lows, bringing up the lows, knocking down the highs, and getting it all metal finished. But we're really happy with where that's at. Once all that's done, it's going to nick out the back of the original roof return. He tells me this is dead easy. It sounds slightly trickier to me, but Martin's very used to this sort of thing. He's going to jenny the fold line in across the back of the roof on the bead roller, fold that. It's a straight line across the back of the roof in the fore and aft plane there. It's a straight line, it's curved that way, but it's straight line that way. So he'll jenny that across, put that return in, jenny it again, put the second return in. He'll jenny it across, put the first return in, shrink a stretch of that, it'll nearly all be shrink to get the curvature right on that. Then he'll jenny for the second return, and then shrink stretch that again to get the back return all trued up. Once that's all trued up, he'll trim that off, weld the corners, and that's all welded in. And again, final bit of metal finishing just to get it looking right from all angles and no highs and lows. And that is a repaired roof, so that's good. In the meantime, on this, ASR still beavering away on things for us. Spoke to Claire at ASR yesterday. And she very kindly reminded me that I'd forgotten the key bits that I'd mentioned previously them doing for us, but because they watch the videos as well, she reminded me that I'd actually mentioned it, because I'd totally forgotten about front end panels. So she's going to be dropping me a price for the front end steelwork, basically the complete front end assembly for the car. We're weighing up the sort of options on things at the minute, but I think it's going to be easiest to get a new complete front end assembly. It gives us something that's geometrically correct to jigs to work from there, because this car has had a knock on the front, which is what's created most of the panel damage, and it would be nice to get a good data point. So that's up in the air, but likely to be coming from ASR. In the meantime, they've also done a repair section for the quarter panel. You may remember the forward corner of one of the quarters, I think it's this side, the offside quarter panel was damaged. and not really retrievable. It is retrievable, everything's retrievable, but it's a balance of the work versus getting a new part, and the aluminium was getting quite thin. It's been repaired once already, it needs welding at the bottom, it needs welding in 2 other places, and it's gone quite thin through corrosion, so realistically it wants replacing. So that's what's happening there. They've also completed the front upper panel, the panel in front of the bonnet, the slam panel I suppose you would call it, and they've done the door skins, and I've finally given them the dimensions so they could put the door handle pockets into the door skins. I suspect, given how they were reasonably symmetrical on this car, I suspect they are in the standard Aston position, if there is such a thing. So they're putting those in. So yeah, all good. So hopefully next week we'll get bills paid for ASR, get that lot paid for, and then we can go down and pick that lot up, and that'll be good because we'll pretty much then have the bulk of the permanently attached aluminium panel parts that are going on this car. Obviously they're not going to be attached for a long time, but we will have those in the bank ready to go for when we get to that stage. On that subject, when we go to talk about the bodywork, I'll come back to Aston parts. There's a couple more bits, so we'll come back to them then, because that's more tied into the body shop. In the meantime, we'll move along, talk about Audi, Wasabi, Saab, whatever you want to call it. Wasabi, we'll call it. A-pillar is the situation this week. Now, Bobby was off yesterday, and today is Thursday, so only 2 days into the week, really. And he is currently working on A-pillar fabrication. Obviously, door hinges, we've had a lot of toing and froing, and you would remember last week I said we were about at the A-pillar. Bobby discovered another issue, which has meant even more work on the door, and door pillar, and a revision, and a modification, and moving the lower hinge up. So an awful lot of continued work along similar veins to what we've already been doing in terms of repositioning this hinge. This hinge is now 40mm higher up than it was, and that has alleviated the issue that we'd run into, which was just a clearance issue. That's now solved. Door now fits again, hinge positions have been revised, a jig has been made for those hinge positions, and so Bobby is now pushing forward with the A-pillar fabrication. Now he knows the positions of where the hinges have got to end up. So realistically, that's his drive forward now. It's not the most photogenic thing, and it's lots and lots of more of the same. So I'm probably not going to dwell on that much this week, because you've seen it before. You will see progress now, because Bobby's now driving forward with the A-post fabrication. So I'll leave you with a bit of A-post fabrication, but next week you should be able to see quite a lot more fabrication, because he is plenty had enough. He has thoroughly had enough of fitting and unfitting a door, and he's now actually able to get on with some attaching metal together and making things appear that will actually be attached to the car, which I think he's pretty relieved about, because I think he's just about, Bobby's very stoic about these things and doesn't sort of let on when he's had enough of something, but I think we could safely say he's had enough of fitting and unfitting that flipping door. So that's where we're at on Wasabi. Things are moving forward now. You'll have noticed from previous projects, I'm trying to think of specifics and I can't think of any now I'm on camera, but you'll have noticed previously that there are times when a project hits a point where we hit a particularly tricky obstacle and there's a lot of iterative processes going on and not a lot of visual progress, and then suddenly things move forward again. And it happens pretty much with every project at some point. It happens multiple times on some projects, and that's where we're at with this. Now things are moving forward again. You'll be able to see some more photogenic progress again, but that's just the way building cars goes, I'm afraid. And it's just flipping hard work at times, and that's that. Right, put my coffee down again to gesticulate at an E-Type. Am I far enough away from camera? Yeah, cool. Matt has been doing a lot of detail work in the back of the E-Type, and it's actually starting to look, for a car in metal, really quite stunning now, this boot area. And again, not the most photogenic piece of a car, the boot, trunk, but actually starting to look really good now. Matt's basically done all the finishing panels around here now, which are the reinforcers for the boot aperture, and they also do the finishing of this line. And we decided to try and make all this nice flowing curve. It's a very curvy car. Having angular things in the boot didn't really make sense. So he's done some finishes at the bottom, some little gussets to tie the wheel arches into the boot floor. He's got these, you saw these last week, he's got these all welded in, they're spot welded along the top, they're welded in around the sides, and then he's flowed those into a closing panel that goes all the way around the back. At the moment there's a gap in that, but that will then tie into, I'm just checking my facts there, but yeah, that's right. There's a gap in the middle at the moment, but there'll be a panel made to tie all that lot then into the boot catch, the boot latch mechanism. That's just awaiting some design work from the CAD guys upstairs because that mechanism is going to be tied into some parts that go behind this number plate area that you'll have seen and talked, that Luke will have talked about previously. He's working on those at the moment, so Matt's not going to finish off that bit of sheet metal there until those bits are finalised. So that's what's happened there. He's removed the flange that will sit under the fuel tank. There's a flange, we're not putting a boot board in anymore, I mentioned that last week, so that flange was needless and looked a bit clunky, was in the way, was 10 millimetres into limiting precious space for the fuel tank. So I said, get rid of that. So Matt's done a really neat job of getting rid of that. Cut the flanges off, made a new infill strip, tidied everything up, and then plug welded that infill strip in to tie the two panels together. And then lastly in the boot, he's made 3 top hat sections which are welded into the forward face of the boot aperture onto the back of the sort of cabin aperture, cabin area for the fuel tank to clamp up against. We'll be making some straps that pull the tank in, and then 2 buttresses, 2 sort of cantilever buttresses that will sit out from the back of that area to support the back of the tank and also tie the fuel tank straps into. But it needed something flat to pull up against because there were beads in the back of that section on the cabin, and also 2 seatbelt anchorages that are in there, all of which stand off and would mean we can't clamp the tank up properly. So he's put some top hat sections in there to clamp the tank against, and then also scallop the bottom of those top hat sections because they will fill with grit when we blast the car for the final metalwork clean-up. They'll fill with grit, so he's put cutouts in to let that grit all come out so we can clean that out, and also so any coating that we put in there can run out the bottom as well. So that's all good. He's got all that area tidied up and sorted out, and he's now moved on to the door skins. And the door skins have followed pretty much the trajectory I suspected they would. I think I mentioned previously that we weren't going to reskin the doors, we were going to keep the original skins. Then Matt found some corrosion when he extended the back edges of the door skins. Found some corrosion, caused some bubbling up of the welds. He was concerned, rightly so, de-skinned the doors, found corrosion that would have been a problem. So Matt's made exactly the right call there to dig into that. Great. But I knew from that point on we were going to hit a period of misery, which we have, which is that the replacement door skins are, well, they're not bad. You know, there's nothing fundamentally terrible about them, but when you fit them to the doors, from previous experience, I know with the long wheelbase doors, they tend to go a bit hollow in the middle. They tend to be slightly low in the middle, which they have been. And the problem we've got on this car is they have a really great American market side impact beam along the door. Now, the UK cars don't have that. UK had obviously a more cavalier regard to safety, but our customer doesn't have quite such a cavalier regard to safety, and in a car as lacking in safety as an E-Type is to start with, he said he'd prefer, he has had a fairly hefty side impact accident while touring in Europe not so long ago, and was fairly keen to maximise any small areas of safety there were in an E-Type, one of which is the door intrusion. So he was keen to keep those beams in the doors, so we have. The problem that gives us is we can't then panel beat the door skins because you can't get in, you can't get to the back of them because there's a bar about that wide blocking access to it. So it gives us a bit of a problem in that we can't increase the crown in the door skin. However, what we do want to do is put a packer in between that. The car originally had like a fiberglass mat, a nicely absorbent mat between the door skin and the side impact bar to stop it drumming. And we wanted to put something in there anyway. So what we've done is we've actually put a non-absorbent plastic packer in there between the door skin and the side impact bar. And then Matt's done some very, very, very careful panel beating to push that panel out wherever he can. And then we've used basically a plastic infill packer as an anti-drumming piece in between the side impact bar and the door skin, which has actually given us enough pressure on the door skin to make sure that it doesn't have that low in the middle. Bear in mind, I'm only talking about a very slight low. I'm probably talking maybe across the length of the door 1.6 millimetres, a 16th of an inch along the length of the door, and it's quite a long door. But that's enough to mean that it is a bit of a problem. With that packer in there now, that's gone, and it's well within what we would normally take out within our sprayed polyester surfacer. So we're happy with that now. It's just we knew it was going to be a problem, didn't want to get into it, had no choice, and we're now solving a problem. It's like a car crash you can see coming a mile off. You know you're going to have it. You can't really do much about it. So there we are, that's what's going on there. Same thing the other side. Interestingly, the customer of this car actually pointed me to, I'm going to mention this on video because he'll watch the video, he actually pointed me to a new old stock door skin for sale. However, for the price of the new old stock door skin, and it was only one side, and the question of whether we would have exactly the same problem with the new old stock door skin, we decided to just stick with the door skins that we'd already got by that point, which were the aftermarket ones, and just go with those, because we knew we were going to have to face the problem on one side of the car anyway with that, and there's nothing to say that the OEM one would be any better. Once we fit, we'd have to fit it to know. So we just decided to stick with what we'd already got on that. So if you're watching, that's why I didn't get back to you about the door skin. We've just stuck with the ones we've got and taken the problem on the chin. So that's what's going on there. And yeah, I think that pretty much wraps up where we're at on that. I think the rest will have been covered by the CAD guys last week, and the other beavering away is going on off-site now on that one. Yes, I think that's where we're at on that. And so on to XJC. XJC. Stu has been busy on all manner of things. I've been busy on one or two things. Stu's been busy on a lot more. Stu has finished a few mountings in the floor. He's put some rubber mounts in for I think he put the mounts in last week, but he's now got we've got the rubbers delivered earlier this week for mounting the subwoofer and the audio processor under the two front seats on the floor. We didn't like the idea of solid mounting them. We wanted to put some flex in, so Stu's put some welded studs in. It's actually quite a technical job. I'll go slightly more. This was actually last week, but I don't think we covered it last week. We were trying to find a way of basically these wanted to put some weld studs in the floor. They needed to be accurately aligned to the subwoofer and the audio processor. Now obviously we can't literally put them through the audio processor and the subwoofer while welding the studs in. The studs are single side spot welded in studs, which means they have a slight bump in the middle after they've been welded, which needs spacing off very slightly, or recessing down into the floor very slightly, and they need to be held exactly on the right centres for those things. Stu came up with a very cunning plan. The tips that our stud welder uses are like that, which are a conical hollow copper piece. I think they're beryllium copper, which then clamps into the single-sided spot weld gun. And then the studs that we weld on, which are like that, they're the spot welding studs, drop into that. I've got the wrong size tip for that, but they basically drop into there and then that welds on. So inevitably we get that slight raise, the thickness of the head of that off the floor, which then means anything you tighten down onto that will tighten down onto that shoulder there and then be a bit wobbly. We don't really want that. So we wanted to recess that into the floor. Now using the stud weld gun with a lot of force, because it adds a lot of heat, that will actually recess itself into the floor very slightly. So Stu had got a plan together. But the other problem we've got is holding them on the correct centres for the bottom of the amp. And normally I would do a steel plate to hold, if we're welding threaded bosses in place, what I normally do is CNC cut out a steel plate, drawn in CAD with the right centres. We bolt the threaded bosses to it. We also cut some access holes on the CNC next to those bosses so we can poke the MIG gun through. We drop it in and then we just weld the bosses in place, unbolt the plate, finish welding the bosses, done. Can't do that with this because these need to be stud welded, and if we put a metal plate on them it will short the stud welder out onto the threads, annihilate the threads, and that won't earth to the car and won't stud weld correctly. And Stu said, well, why don't I just do it in plastic? Cut one out in plastic, it will align the studs, and then the little taper cone of that will drop into the taper on that, perfectly align, and mean that the bottom of that ends up dead flush with the floor and it can't short out because it's plastic. So top marks on Stu's lateral thinking there, because that worked perfectly. So he drilled the holes in the correct places on a piece of this ABS sheet and then spot welded all the studs on through the ABS sheet where the countersinks in that centre the nozzle, can't go off. Worked perfectly. Good work by Stu, as usual, coming up with cunning solutions to things. So that got those in, and we've got rubber bobbins that then screw onto that, sit flush with the floor. They're the right height to space the amp and the audio processor through the sound deadening foam that will be going on the floor, and means they're flexibly mounted. They're not going to suffer from vibration, cracking circuit boards, all that sort of stuff. And also the sound from the subwoofer is not going to be impeded by being solid mounted to a big mass of steel through a load of sound deadening. So that's all got a good plan there. I've done a little bit of finishing welding up various holes in the engine bay. Basically got that to the point now where we can't do any more until the engine's out. I'd missed a couple, the couple that had pinholed from when we dressed off, they'd pinholed back through, needed doing again. I've made a bit of a mess of a couple of them basically. Stu was being very kind, but actually I've made a mess of a couple of them, so I've basically redone them because they'd pinholed a bit from some oxide that had come through. So that was that, and then Stu's now working on the rear end of the car. And particularly the fuel, well, I did a bit of work as well, and Stu's done quite a lot on fitting the fuel tanks. Originally on these cars, the two fuel tanks were basically separate entities connected by a common connection to a fuel pump with a changeover valve. And when but at the petrol station, you would fill one tank and then you would go and fill the other tank. They were separate things, and they had a switch to change over which tank the car was using. Very aircraft-esque, quite cool in a way, but a pain in the ass when you're going to actually fill the tanks up at the petrol station. And what we did on a previous XJC we built is put a big link pipe in to link the two tanks and then take a common feed from that link pipe to the pump. So it did two things. It meant you could fill either side of the car and it filled both tanks, and it also filled the pump. However, the tanks we've got this time, there's only one new tank available for these cars. We wanted to get new tanks, and it had a slightly strange pickup pipe arrangement internally within the tank. And the connection that we wanted to use on the outside of the tank, which was the original pickup pipe connection, wouldn't really do what we wanted it to do in terms of co-linking the tanks. They originally had these pickup pipes inside, soldered in, and then the outlet fitting was on there, and it meant that well, for a start, the tanks this pipe would airlock when we tried to fill the tanks up, and secondly, the flow between the two tanks was limited by the size of this pipe, which is not very big. So what we did is we desoldered the outlet fittings from the tanks, and then we desoldered these pipes by just heating up the patches on the tank where these were soldered on. So that pipe came loose and flapped around inside the tank. These had a filter, big filter on, which was too big to fit out through the sender hole in the tank. So we kind of melted them and crushed them and pulled them out of the sender hole, pulled these pipes out of the sender hole. So we got all that lot out of the tank. And then we brazed some AN12 fittings, brazed rather than soldered, just to make sure they're really solid so we can screw onto them and not risk breaking the unions out of the tank. So at the bottom, the last thing you want to do is break the union out of the tank with a tank full of fuel on top of it. That would be really bad. So we brazed those two connections onto the bottoms of the tanks. They come out at about 30 degrees out of the bottoms, and then we're getting some 30-degree fittings to screw onto those, AN12 fittings to screw onto those, to take a big stainless steel braided Teflon lined hose across to a T-piece, which is then going to feed the fuel pumps. But that will also mean you've got an AN12 connection between your two tanks, which will just about keep up with the fuel pump filling them. Probably not quite, but it'll mean that by the time, if you fill it with a reasonable degree of patience, it will cross-fill the two tanks without having to go to the other side of the car and fill the other side. So still better to fill it to the top, wait, pause a second, make sure the level's not dropping. It's still quicker than going round to the other side and then filling the other side of the car. So much nicer from a filling up point of view. And it also gives us a cross feed to our anti-surge arrangement that we've showed you in previous weeks. So that lot's now done. Stu has also drilled the holes. We had the owner of the car visit yesterday, and he picked up, he's had a look at the CAD work that Luke had been doing in terms of the design work for the rear view mirrors. Checked that he was happy with those, which he was. Checked the positioning of those from a sat in the car point of view. So Stu's also, well, we depanelled the car, as you remember from last week. Stu's also repanelled the car up so that the owner could sit in a fully panelled car, and also sat in the driver's seat with it fitted. Checked the rear view in the rear view mirrors. Happy with all that. And also there's some design modifications that the owner wanted doing to the front valance. So we finalised what needs doing there. That's all done. We've also got some bits just held together with magnets at the minute to do a similar cutout in the other side front buttress next to the radiator for clearances for coolant pipes, which brings me on to the last bit of, well, actually no, penultimate bit of work that's being done on the XJC, which is the planning and sorting of the cooler pack. We know what radiator we're using. We're basically using an XJS, XJC type radiator, original pattern, but aluminium, fully aluminium, not brass radiator. So that's fine. That's a known. The coolers in front of that, we were going to use an XJ Coupe Series 3 aircon matrix. We've actually discovered, Cal bought one from Fen Air International in East Anglia, very helpful people. However, the unions were not quite what we thought they were going to be. They're very hard to tell in a picture or a photo, and the unions were not quite right for what we wanted. What we've then discovered is that a Series 2 XJ Coupe aircon matrix is very simple, which is actually very similar to the earlier type XJS aircon matrix, as fitted to the V12 models and the I can't even remember, one of the other models, I can't remember which, but basically the earlier type XJ, pre-AJ16 powered XJS aircon condensers has the outlets in what appear to be the right places for us, and it puts the dryer across in the right direction. It was reversed for where we wanted. We need the pipes basically on the offside, the offside, driver's side of the car, and actually the Series 2 XJC, Series 3 XJC cooler put the pipes on the near side. We need them on the offside. The XJS cooler pack appears to do that, so we're going for that. We're just waiting delivery on that. That should be coming imminently. Once we've got that, we can finalise that, but we wanted to make sure we've got a comfortable amount of space for the pipes, hence that piece of fabrication. What a load of waffle. Basically, pipes are going through, we need room for them. And then the other thing we've got is we're using a particular, Cal will tell you exactly which one, but a particular Porsche 911 twin pass oil cooler as the charge cooler water radiator, which will then, it's quite slim and long, and that will fit in under the aircon evaporator, and we need to be able to get the charge cooler pipes through from that and also mount the charge cooler pump, all of which has got to go behind the grille, low down on the offside of the car, and that's more work that's been going on, and we've just basically got to finalise that, but we need all the hardware here to finalise that, but we're making sure all the mounting provisions are in, because pretty much at that point we can put the car to the body shop. Anything otherwise will only be rivet nut holes, and although we may pre-drill the holes for rivet nuts, we don't fit rivet nuts prior to blast and zinc metal spray anyway, because they always fill up with zinc. If you try and tap them out, they normally spin. So we usually try and fit the rivet nuts later on, post paintwork anyway, into pre-drilled holes. So the worst case, we might have to drill a couple of holes, nothing too drastic there. And then lastly, Stu is working on something I can lean over and grab, which is this nice piece. He's just wheeled up a nice little compound curved bit of steel there, welded it to some folded flanges, and this is to make a perch for the front half of the spare wheel to sit on in the spare wheel well. We're going to run, same as we've run on a couple of other cars previously, a rather nifty Jag thing, which is I believe is it 16 inch or 15 inch, that Space Saver? 16, isn't it? I think it's a 16. Yeah, it looks like it. It's 16 inch aluminium cast alloy Space Saver spare, really nifty bit of Jag stuff, which is what we're running on the Churchill car, and they're just really nice. What's that? 18 inch even. It's an 18 inch aluminium Jag Space Saver, which was fitted to a few XJSs. I believe it was the very, very last of the XJSs had them. And they're just a really cool thing. As a Space Saver spare goes, they're just a really, in fact, Stu's walking over with it now. He's going to show you. They're just a really cool thing. We've mentioned them before. We're being careful with this one because it's already painted for Churchill, but that's actually an alloy Space Saver. They're very light for what they are, super compact and really flat on the top. So they fit in a really small space, and they're just a really nice thing to have in the car without adding loads of weight. So fitting one of those, but we need a perch to sit it on at the front, and with it to clear all of the fuel system. And we've got the bit to sit it on at the back, because you may recall from right at the beginning of this project, Tom modified actually, right early days, he modified the boot floor, so we've got a perch at the back that Stu's making a corresponding perch at the front, so that's what that piece is that he's making there. That'll be welded in shortly, and I think that takes us to, yes, dashboard. Jamie's just reminded me, Stu's also been doing some modifications to the dashboard, principally to clear the redesigned intake fan for the HVAC system, even with Luke doing everything he could to save every ounce of space in that unit. which still meant we had to space down very slightly at the bottom of the dash. So Stu's just done some modifications, so that rather than just spacing it down, it's a bit neater than that. So he's done some modifications to get some clearance for the HVAC intake fan in the lower dash panel where it's above your legs when you're driving. So final little tweak there, but we're basically there with all the dash arrangement in this now. So yeah, we're on the very, very final stages of getting this ready for its final blast and zinc metal spray. We do need next week to get it on the 2-post lift in here rather than this little scissor lift, so we can get it right up in the air, drop the engine and box out and do all the underside welding, tidying, finishing underneath, and at that point I think we can strip it down and get it in for blast and zinc metal spray. So that's good news. I'm going to have a quick sip of coffee and then explain why I've got Scrap Heap Challenge going on here. What is going on here is lots of stuff. You may recall ages ago we talked about making a little Bobby project, really, making a machine for swaging. Matt's just dropped a dolly on his hand. It sounded like he didn't get too many fingers, though. Yeah, we talked about making a machine for swaging the ends of aluminium hardlines for air conditioning refrigerant. And thank you to Jonathan Plumridge at PBE CNC, we now have all of the tooling parts to enable us to do that. I can pick up a couple of examples of those. We've got a lot more, but that's one of the swage blocks that is machined in D2 tool steel for us. There's one attached to the hydraulic cylinder in there. And what I'm talking about is for making those end forms, which you will have probably seen, a lot of our viewers will probably have seen. But what's strange is that nobody that we can find in the UK, and we've tried quite a few, can make those on the end of a long hard line. We can buy them as a separate piece and weld them on. We don't really want to do that. We want to do it how an OEM would do it, which is put those swages directly onto the end of the hard line and not put the welds in the line. So to that end, Bobby designed the tooling with a bit of trial and error to start with to make sure it worked, and then drew it up properly, drew it all on CAD. Jonathan's made those parts. He made the first set for us some time ago so we could trial it and make sure it all worked, which it did. There was a couple of very, very minor tweaks, and then he's now made all the rest of the tooling, which has now arrived. That arrived yesterday. I know he's an extremely overworked man, so it's very much appreciated that he got that done for us. So that's PBE CNC. I would say for all your CNC needs, the downside is he's absolutely up to here with work. So don't give him any more work, otherwise he won't be able to do ours. But yeah, really, very nice guy, and very, very competent and very, very useful, and has done some beautiful bits of machining for us in the past. If you remember the door mirrors on the 2 Mark 1 Escorts, which were an incredible piece of machining, well, that's his. They were his handiwork as well. So yeah, very, very good. Anyway, back to the point. The reason for the Scrappy Challenge is now we've got all the tooling, we need to actually build the machine to use it. So what I'm just doing at the moment is I got this hydraulic pump in a even better than that, as everybody says here, quoting the Fast Show character. I got this in an industrial auction a little while ago, a little 240-volt hydraulic pump, which works. I've just tested it, cleaned it out, made sure it's all good, got all the rubbish out of the tank, put it all back together, so that's ready to go. And then, thanks to a local chap that we know, he has donated me a power pack off a press that was a bit hodgepodge, but it has a double-acting 5-port valve on it. So I'm going to take the valve block off that, combine that with this hydraulic pump, going to get Martin to fabricate us a bit of a trolley, and then there'll be a drip tray on it and various other things. Bobby's got that design in his head, so he'll brief Martin on that lot. And then we're going to build a bit of a trolley with a sort of pedestal on it for this hydraulic unit and the tooling to sit on, with the hydraulic pump down underneath, all the weight low down so it doesn't fall over, and so we can wheel it around to the job. And then we'll be able to swage our hydraulic line, our aircon refrigerant lines, using all of this stuff that we've built for not too much money, because it's a minor problem. We don't want to spend tons and tons of money solving it. However, we do want to solve it because we haven't really got another solution, and nor has anybody else we've tried. So that's what all this lot's about. The brass stuff, I've made a little bit of progress on that, not a lot of progress on that, because I think I probably touched on last time that I'd broken one of the pieces of brass. Well, I've broken another piece of brass. There's something strange going on with the forces whilst forming that. I've formed one successfully now. I think I've got the winning formula for doing it, so I'm just waiting for another piece of brass now to do the other one. And I then should have all that done, and then I can mitre them. Jim machined the second of the leading edges for me the other day. So I now have all the pieces bar the second of the formed pieces to do those windows for the Churchill project. So hopefully next week I should be able to get those buttoned up and finished. But yes, juggling a lot of balls, so to speak, at the moment, and little bits of lots and lots of things. That's where we're at on that lot. And then I think Mark's actually not here today, and rather than making Jamie's edit really tricky tomorrow, I'm going to do the bodywork bit this week, and then it'll be back to Mark. Don't worry, it'll be back over to Mark next week, but just this week so that Jamie's not trying to do things last minute tomorrow. I'll pick up Mark's bit. So over to me in the body shop. Mark has been, well, the body shop in general, not just Mark, have been prepping the bonnet and boot for the second of the Mark 1 Escorts. You may recall the carbon fibre bonnet and boot, which Cal was bonding together week before last or last week, probably last week actually. He'd just finished bonding those together and they'd just come through into the body shop. Well, they did the fundamental initial blocking, sanding all the edges, getting all the edges nice and true, cleaned up, tidied. Quick initial block on the outside, get everything ready, and then Mark's got those into polyester, and then they're now in the body shop and they've been blocked, ready for paint. The primer's been touched in on those. Are they in primer now? Actually, I think, yeah, they are now in epoxy primer. And blocked and ready for paint. I think they're sitting there ready for paint. They're not being painted because the paint booth is full of other stuff. I saw Gaz this morning doing the direct. In fact, I might just peer through the curtain and quickly check. You were doing direct on stuff for Allegro, weren't you, this morning? Yeah, second Allegro, yeah. So Gaz was painting the black Ceramix Direct urethane paint on all of the interior parts, like the seat runners and seat bases and various interior parts for the second of the Allegro projects. First Allegro project's already got those in. The second set of those, Gaz was just painting this morning with the Ceramix Direct, so they're all in the booth hardening off at the moment. Once they're done, as you can see through the window, there's a variety of other parts. Another part that was done this week was getting the paint onto the first set of Allegro side skirts that you can see there. The second Allegro, I'm not going to talk about that because that'll be all talked about in the assembly shop. Basically, we've got the second set of those to do, but that depends on a bit more fit-up work that will be going on next door soon. As I say, the bonnet and boot are basically ready for paint for the Escort, along with the grille, which is sat on there, which has been prepped ready for that. And currently, Gaz and Steve are working on, remember I said I'd come back to this, and I am doing now, on the Aston. The two lift-off panels that we still haven't got a final plan for were the bonnet and boot. The doors are being reskinned, so they need a bit more stripped down and the frame's cleaning up and whatever, but the bonnet and boot are in unknown condition. We suspect that the boot lid's not too bad, it's seen a bit of life, but nothing too drastic. The bonnet has seen a lot of life and is pretty mauled, but we need to do the archaeology work on it, which is going on at the moment. So I'll wander in here, in fact, try not to trip over anything. Talking of wing mirrors for Escorts that were machined by Jonathan at PBE, there is an example of one of the housings, which is quite a technical piece. Machining that from solid, along with its counterpieces, quite a tricky job. So yes, we touched on it before, but it's quite impressive to see them. But yeah, going on at the minute, Steve and Gaz paint stripping the panels for the Aston to try and find out, do the archaeology on them, to try and find out what we've got to work with and whether it's, to put the blunt term on it, a load of old scrap or not. The front end of this bonnet is bad. It's been broken off. The frame's broken both sides there under all this detritus. It's broken completely and been filled with some sort of 1970s filler. But we need to work out what we can deal with, how much we can salvage, because to do a new bonnet from scratch is jolly expensive. It's doable. ASL will be able to do that for us because they have the books to do that on. However, that's a pretty expensive undertaking, so we want to just find out what's salvageable, what isn't. And actually there's quite a lot salvageable. Looking at this now, there's quite a lot salvageable. I imagine the bonnet's going to need a new leading edge on it, and we're going to need to rebuild the frame because it's going to need welding back together properly there and there. But we probably will be able to salvage the bulk of it. So I think that will be salvageable. And looking at it, speaking too soon, I imagine, but looking at the boot lid that Gaz is working on, that looks completely salvageable, I would say, looking at it. Again, we might need to separate it, we might need to do various work on it. They're all aluminium, both of these are aluminium frame, aluminium skin. So the plus side of that is we're not dealing with corrosion between the, well, we're not dealing with your standard steel aluminium corrosion between the inner and outer skins, because often these would be aluminium skin on a steel frame, and then that usually sets up a load of bimetallic corrosion that means completely dismantling everything to deal with. We're not going to be dealing with that, but we are dealing with the fact that the front's been folded over in an accident. So quite a bit of rework going to be needed, but both looking salvageable to one to a greater extent than the other. But that's pretty much where we're at in the body shop. The Interceptor's gone next door, but I think that went next door last week, so nothing new there. I think at that point it's time to wrap it up. Mark will pick up the body shop again next week, don't worry, he's not gone anywhere, he's just working on it. He's working, I imagine, enjoying it immensely, doing a water pump change on some modern Vauxhall today, which on his good lady's modern Vauxhall, so I imagine he's enjoying that immensely. At that point, I'm going to hand over to next door into the assembly shop and to Cal and let him take you through there and see what's going on in there.
Thank you very much, Nat. And I'm going to start with a delicious round stone coffee, which what I'll probably do is just talk all the way through and not actually drink any of it. But it is available in our shop, our own Retropower blend, retropower.co.uk/shop. So I'm going to start by looking at this mysterious shape under here, which I imagine if you're a regular viewer you will already have guessed is the Jensen Interceptor, which I'll give you a little peek of in here. Obviously, if you look at the last episode before this one, you'll have seen it being polished up. It's already now got dust on it because despite having a cover over it in the body shop, the problem is it's so dusty in there that the dust from the cover then gets back on the car. But yeah, this colour, absolutely stunning. Everybody who's come in here so far has just said the colour looks gorgeous. And I don't think on photos and videos it really does it justice, because it kind of looks a little darker and a little blacker. But it absolutely pops. It's kind of a real kind of goldy, olivey green, and yeah, can't wait to start getting bits bolted onto this. And on that note, we're making some inroads. We've been battling this week actually with the steering column on this, which turned out to be bent, which we discovered when we were going through replacing the bearings and bushes on it, that by the time it actually had decent bearings with no play in it, it kind of went tight in one spot because there's a little bend on the inner shaft. And I believe Nat then sourced a replacement column, which also has a problem, so column gate. Anyway, we'll give you a bit more on that in the next episode. This, which from that angle there, looks absolutely sensational, even if I do say so myself. A few angles of attack on these at the minute. So the guys you might have already seen have just been painting the side skirts. So they're actually ready to go back on. I just need to get some rubber sort of fillet that's going to sit in the sort of panel gap between the two. So we can get those on, and that will properly complete the look then. And then James has been working on the vacuum, let's say it's a vacuum manifold, is probably the best description, but we're basically making a little vacuum reservoir that's actually made out of a rectangular aluminium box that mounts onto the surface of it the map sensor. It mounts the idle air control valve, and it has ports for obviously connecting to the throttle bodies. We showed previously the little spaces we made to sit between the manifold and the throttle body to have a little vacuum take-off on each one, so they all tee together to that. And then another connection that goes to the servo for obviously the vacuum assistance on the servo, and then we'll have a connection to go to the fuel pressure regulator for the vacuum connection to that. So yeah, we were trying to make that all in one little compact unit, and then there's like a little ITG filter that will go onto the idle valve, so when the valve is allowing air through to raise the idle, that will be filtered air as well. It's just a little bit neater than plumbing it back to the airbox, and simplifies the engine bay a little bit. But yes, one thing that is notable with the carbon airbox on here, the engine bay does look quite even and full. It's funny, we put the odd video and photo on Instagram. Follow us on Instagram, Retropower Cars. And a few comments on YouTube as well, and the thing people are constantly saying is, oh, the engine's miles forward, it'll handle terribly with all that weight over the front. And it's like, I'm almost fed up of saying it's exactly as it is in an Integra Type R. The front subframe, engine, gearbox, the whole floor pan, inner wings, everything. So that engine versus the front axle line is exactly as it is in an Integra DC2 Type R. It looks different because there's less overhang at the front, so our front end is closer to the engine. But also, when you don't have the airbox on there, or the throttle bodies, obviously it kind of skews your view of the engine bay, so it looks like the engine's miles forward, even though actually when all that lot's on, it's quite full at the back as well. And then we're going to have a strut brace going across there, which fills it in even more, and then the finishing touch will be a flexible duct that goes from the airbox to this here, and we haven't made those parts yet, but they have been designed. So there's basically an indicator bezel, if you like, that is actually a feed to that duct, and then it has a very, very high intensity LED indicator kind of suspended on a little spar in the middle of it, which in turn is a nod to the fact that used to be an indicator and side light, so it was kind of one above the other. So there was already a visual split across the middle of it. So we've basically just got a perimeter with a line across the middle, which is actually a bar that suspends the indicator kind of in free space with the air rushing around it. And then the other side is the same, only it just feeds air generally into the engine bay rather than directly to the engine, but that's our cold air feed. So that's that. Then earlier this week, both of the Allegros went through to the paint shop to just do a little finishing touch on the door frame. So we wanted to do the door frames black and the B-post black. So by the time we've got the rear window seal in there, the black carries on all the way through, which wasn't actually an original thing. If you look at them originally, they have quite a chunky black seal around the rear window and then a painted frame on the front. Now some of the luxury versions had chrome around both, but we're trying to get rid of some of the chrome on, or all of the chrome on these, and it kind of felt to me like it would look a bit odd if the black didn't carry on all the way through. So we've done the wooden door frames in black, and then we've got a black trim which I showed previously, which is E30 on the lower part of the window here, so that should all work really nicely. And then while it was there, we also just did a little bit of black on the brackets and the pieces that sit behind the grille, so when you're looking through the grille it all looks black there as well. So that is good. And then Richard was trial fitting these C-pillars that he's upholstered, and a strip that runs under the back window, basically fills the gap between the parcel shelf and the back window. Trial fitting all of that, trial fitting it with the parcel shelf, which we'd already had kind of loosely assembled before, and doing some upholstery. So there's a tube that runs across that supports the front of the parcel shelf, and it's where the back seats mate up against when they're in and up. That was always planned to be directly leathered, so he's done that leathering on there. Had everything dry fitted in the back, really happy with how all that sits, so that signified the point we were happy to get the back window in. So the back window has been fitted on both cars now, and all that lot is just awaiting final fitment. The only reason we aren't doing that is we need to get the grills anodised, and those parts and all the billet interior parts are going anodised in like a graphite grey, which is kind of our accent colour on the interior. And I'm just waiting on the armrests for the doors, which are also a machined part, and that will be the last of the accent parts, so we can get that whole batch of anodised parts away. We were also waiting for the instruments, which came last week from Speed Hut, so we disassemble them, take the bezels off, get them anodised the same accent colour. So yeah, we are looking pretty good, so looking forward to getting all that lot together. Alex has also been continuing with the wiring work, so for the first car, the main dash harness is just being buttoned up. He's just doing the last bits of termination on that, and then that's ready to go in. And then he's just started doing the rope mock-up for the rear loom. So he's already done the design for the whole of the rear modular section of the wiring harness. So it's just laying rope out to finalise the routing, get the length, so he can then add the lengths into the design and then start making that one, which will actually be the thing that needs to be done before we can finish the interior. So really we're getting quite close to the point where the wiring will need to go in, then we can do all the sound deadening stuff on the floor, we can do the carpets, we can get the rest of the interior in, which actually will happen fairly quickly once those foundations are in place. So that's that, and this, which is also an awesome angle on this car with the front wheel turned. A few people keep asking me in person and on the social medias whether these wheels are staying on the car. Now they're not, although I must admit they were just thrown on because we had an XJR donor car, and sometimes I look at it and think actually they look quite cool, especially, I mean the rears need to be spaced out slightly, but they do kind of look okay. But no, they're not going to be the final wheels, so watch this space on what the final wheels will be. But yeah, we are cracking on with some of the general assembly that we want to get done before the engine goes in. So engine's just waiting for the valve shims to be ground. While we're waiting for that, we're getting everything else in place, so when the engine goes in, there's minimal amount of work still to do in the engine bay. So Anthony's been doing things like fitting the power steering reservoir. He's fitted the screen wash tank, which sits under the near side inner wing and has a neck that comes through the inner wing to a fill neck at the top there, as you can see. We did all the fabrication for the mounts for that when it was at metalwork stage. He's been carrying on with the AC plumbing, so we've got the dryer mounted, there's a shield that sits around that. The plumbing as far as the inner wing, where it passes through bulkhead fittings into the engine bay. Then also under this side of the inner wing, there is the expansion overflow tank. So we're running what I would term a Japanese cooling system on this, where you fill the radiator completely, and then as the coolant expands, it actually blows the pressure cap, and the expanding coolant comes out of the overflow port and into a catch tank, which has which is fed into it via a dip tube that goes to the bottom of the tank, so that when the car cools again and the coolant contracts, it sucks the coolant that it blew out into the catch tank back into the radiator. So that catch tank's been fitted under the inner wing there as well. The guys raptored that before it went in there because that's a bit open to the elements under there, so we wanted something tough on that. So yeah, getting various components in place. Well, I've just finalised the drawings for the bezels, the machine bezels around the air intakes on the front, which feed air to the HVAC system and to the engine on the other side, so we can get those machined. And Anthony's been dry fitting all of the lights, the driving lights and the main headlamps, just to make sure everything fitted nicely before all those parts get stripped down to be copper plated, because I probably will have mentioned before, all of the bright work on this car will be polished copper. So the door frames are brass at the minute because that's their bare naked finish, but when they're all done, everything's going to be polished copper. And then Luke has been frantically 3D printing, so both of our Bamboo Labs X1 printers have literally been running almost 24/7, probably about the last month. He's now printed all of one side of the rear door card, well, quarter card, sort of three-dimensional sections that go together to kind of create the shape of that panel. He's just about finished printing all of the rear of the centre console sections. So the rear door card parts means that Richard can now start to assemble all that lot, make sure he's happy with the fit of it all, and then start leathering that. So that's very exciting. And then whilst he's doing one, we'll finish the other side. So that should be ready by the time he's done the leathering on the first side. Yeah, so I'm just can't wait to start seeing all that interior come together. So that's where we're at on that. We'll swing this way carefully, because there is a visual change here in that the orange Allegro is now sitting on its proper wheels. It's been sat around on some Integra Type R standard wheels for ages. But we decided to do the wheels on this one in just like a graphite grey, basically, to match the accent colour on the interior. So yeah, it's cool to see it with the sort of stance correct on it now. Got to do the side skirts on this one still, and then we showed last week actually all the dash 3D print stuff coming together. George has done a few more bits on that, so he's put the holes in the dash top for where the tweeters are going to go. But at the minute we're just waiting for the central section of the lower dash to be printed so we can trial fit all of that, and then that dash can come out to start being leathered. So yeah, it's kind of exciting times on the interiors on multiple cars at the minute. And then I think Nat will have already covered the fact that we've got the bonnet and boot lid for this being prepped for paint at the minute. So the other bits on this, we're just about to start getting the throttle bodies back in there, getting the instrument binnacle in. I think we've got one more piece of carpet to go in, but yeah, realistically this will fly together pretty quickly now, and I would say in a week or two we should be at the point we could hopefully test fire this up for the first time. So I think, on that note, I probably need to hand over to George and Luke to see what they've been doing this week.
Hi guys, welcome back to the CAD Coliseum. This week has been, as per usual, a bunch of little small things. Cal's on a real push to get a lot of little bits over the line and into the stage of manufacturing. So backdating to some stuff which was designed all the way back for Utah, which needed tweaks for currently Churchill. All the way through to new stuff, like I did a mirror concept for the owner of the XJC, He really liked it, wanted a couple more tweaks on that, so I've done that now. Cal's quite happy with that, I'm really happy with that. And then, honestly, it's been really full steam ahead with the 3D printers here. We made a move about when I started to start manufacturing interiors in-house. And it's been fettling that process down to something that works, basically. We've had a couple of issues with print quality, print coming detached because they're quite big parts, warping, so when you do these multi-section prints then they go back together. It hasn't really been too perfect, but we've kind of come down to a method now which works really well. I'm really happy with it. I bonded together Churchill's door card, rear near side door card earlier on this week, and we just tried that on the car this morning and I was really, really happy with that. That's going to look really good. Along with that, Churchill center console, the rear part of that is coming together so Richard can do the rear seats, and honestly that's the last print on the printer for that now. And yeah, then back on with, I think George mentioned last week that he was doing the scan cleaning for the DBS, which I scanned last week. We now have that in CAD, and George is going through the process of trying to figure out if everything's going to fit. It will fit. And then I can kind of crack on with the interior side of that and fettling that down to something that will actually work and the client likes and everything. And then same process with the XJC. As I said, we had the client in this week for that. Cal had a good conversation with him regarding the interior. We were really, really close last time. It's honestly just changes to how the center console flows into the dash and rearranging the sort of components that go into that. But yeah, nothing really too much more to update other than that. I think I'm going to pass on to George.
Hello. So, like Luke has already said, I have primarily this week been on cleaning scan data. As you can see on my screen, I finally got the bulk of it into Fusion now. So, Luke scanned it last week, and I spent like most of this week cleaning it, getting all the holes out of it, kind of doing all the alignment, so we can have a multi-prong attack. So the reason I need it is to get all the chassis design done. Which is pretty close, but we just wanted to do some cross-referencing to make sure everything was going to kind of work before we actually pulled the trigger on making it. And then, like Luke said, he needs it so he can get cracking with the actual more accurate interior. But yeah, it's all looking like it's going to fit relatively well. Bearing in mind we just threw this engine in, which is the LT1, which we're going to be running in the Aston Martin. It fits quite well, actually, like surprisingly well. We probably need to move it forward slightly because, as you can see, it is quite snug. Which has then thrown a new issue our way, which is we don't have room for the steering rack, which we was going to use, which was a Mondeo rack. So after a little bit of research, we're actually going to be going for a Subaru or GC8 steering rack, which is the same width ball to ball on the ball joints, but the orientation on it's a little bit different, and it's going to actually work in terms of the mounts a bit better and allow us to move the rack closer to the engine because the mounts are in a different place effectively. But yeah, that's what I've been up to. I don't think Jimmy got any photos of this, but I've just spent the morning CADing the steering rack we're going to be using up. So now that's going to be a case of bringing that into the CAD model of the chassis, getting all the mounts ready, and then, yeah, I think we'll be at a position where we can start to actually make the chassis, and that'll be down to Nat. But yeah, thanks for watching.
Right, thank you very much, CAD guys. I'm not going to go down the den this week because I'm aware that this video is already probably very large, but we do have some interesting things going on down there. So next week, tune back in and we'll show you what's going on down the den and obviously the latest in the Retropower workshop. I'll see you then.